is Jesse Abing at Lingo Live, and I'm listening to Chris Smit at Culture Matters.
Hey Jesse, good morning. Or what time? What time is it actually?
Yeah, good morning. It's still we're at 11 in the morning here in New York.
Here in New York, you just revealed one of the questions that I have for you, which is, okay, opening question always the same because I don't know you that well, but we did chat before hitting record. But the audience needs to know you as well. So do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, where are you now? We know New York, but maybe it's interesting to know which part of New York. And what is your so-called cultural frame of reference?
Yeah. So I am originally from Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
I grew up on a dairy farm in southwest Wisconsin in a small rural community.
Uh-huh.
My parents are farmers from generations back.
Uh-huh.
They came from the Holland sort of Germany area of the world, maybe some hundred years ago. And so that's kind of, I don't know, it's probably a little bit too deep, but
it's cool. It's nice.
Yeah, and they've just kind of stayed in the same place in southwest Wisconsin since they arrived in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so, farming is sort of where I got my start, but I couldn't be further from that now.
Exactly.
Here in New York City. The path that sort of led me here was really just education. I went to school to become a teacher, Spanish teacher in particular. Went to Minneapolis to do that for a while, and then moved to Austin, Texas, where I got did my graduate work in Hispanic linguistics, second language acquisition, sociolinguistics, and met Tyler Muse, the CEO and co-founder of Lingo Live, while I was in Austin, Texas, maybe 5 years ago in March, and we started talking about this project he was working on, and eventually just kind of kept in touch about it until it became something much bigger than it was 5 years ago. And so I moved to New York because of this specific project, Lingo Live, and I am now in Manhattan. I live in the Hell's Kitchen, Midtown area of Manhattan. So
right. That's
literally
9th Avenue, something, that area?
Yeah, between 10th and 11th over, close to the water, which is great, but couldn't imagine something further than from like feeding calves to walking my Shih Tzu dog to the 8th Avenue, 42nd Street train station.
Right.
It's just a completely different world.
So what would it take for you to become a farmer?
What would it take for me to go back and be a farmer?
At what price, at what cost would you do that?
I know. It would have to be my mom begging me and telling me that she really needed me to do this for her, and only for someone else could I probably be roped into doing that.
Right.
I do some work still with the farming community. I do some hosting some meetings, translating. There's a lot of people who speak Spanish in that area who work on farms. Uh-huh. And so I get called in a lot to translate or interpret employee reviews or monthly meetings, or I'm like vague, just peripherally in touch with it. One toe still in it, and that's plenty for me. Yeah.
All right. Just out of my curiosity, and also for the audience, because 50% of the audience comes from the U.S. and 50% comes from outside of the U.S. I guess most non-Americans would be able to place the United States, but Wisconsin, is that upper Midwest?
Yes, exactly. We are literally probably in the center of the United States, the very top, on the border with Canada. Actually, it's probably just Lake Superior, but yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You are also, that's a question that popped in. You're also writing a dissertation on online language coaching for learners of heritage languages, and this is a doctorate again. Can you fill us in a little bit more about what that is about?
I can try.
Because those PhDs are very specific, so don't confuse us, but just shed a little bit light on that if you can.
Yeah, I think it's. I've really done a lot of work with. I would say Hispanics in the U.S. Most when I say heritage learners, what I mean by heritage is somebody who grew up in a household where the dominant language in the U.S., English, is not the language necessarily of the household. And so one of the issues is that we want to preserve diversity within the United States, although that's very difficult to do, especially when it comes to preserving language across generations specifically. So I'm just trying to help people find ways to approach this issue. So when we get, for example, Hispanics in the university who have grown up with Spanish in the household, but did not go to school in a Spanish environment. We're not educated in Spanish, so maybe their levels are a little bit lower. They were educated in English, et cetera, but they want to stay connected to their culture, but specifically to their linguistic roots, and they want to develop that. Maybe they want to work in the embassy. Maybe they want to work in a Spanish-speaking country, or even some of their towns that are very bilingual. They want to be more poised to be professionally productive in Spanish as well as English. It's really a tricky task to develop this language that you spoke as a child, but were never educated in that language, and to become maybe develop an academic register in that variety. And there's also a lot of identity issues that come along with that, right? So like maybe you were critiqued a lot as a child by your grandparents. It's often by those closest to you who say, your Spanish seems a little, they'll use terms like pocho, street Spanish, kitchen Spanish. And so you often start to, I don't know about often, but I think what we notice is that people can really internalize some of that critique, even if the critique is positive. They think, wow, people are just paying a lot of attention to my language. So you stop using it over time because it gets so much attention. And it kind of tends to, deteriorate's as a strong word, but it can have real implications for the way you use Spanish, or even if you use it at all anymore. So the coaching aspect of it, the online kind of language coaching, I think is really important. I'm trying to prove or make a hypothesis that it's really important to helping people overcome not only the linguistic issues, I don't really have a strong control of the subjunctive, but also the affective issues of like motivation, confidence, a sense of belonging in a community, to really just sort of look at yourself, see yourself as enough, not have to feel like you are lesser of a person because you are not a full participant in a certain community or don't speak a language fully. I think one thing that I hear from participants often is that they feel like they are stuck between two worlds, like they are from two worlds, but not really of either of those worlds or fully accepted by either of those worlds. And so what I'm trying to do, which is it's just a small like frame shift, but is to see yourself as somebody who lives between two worlds, or maybe in the peripherality of two worlds, but you are a connective tissue between different cultural worlds or linguistic worlds, or you serve a very important purpose from my perspective, and maybe like the evolution of humanity is to connect different people from different places, different ways of thinking. So I don't know if it's going that well, but it's kind of that's my goal.
Am I correct in thinking that then your audience for this is generally second generation newcomers, if that makes sense? Because I reckon that in general, at least from my understanding, that's how it goes. First generation, and we're using Spanish or Latinos as an example. This goes for the Indians, this goes for the Turks, for everyone who immigrates to the United States in this particular case, of course. So the first generation generally only sticks to the mother language and the mother culture. The second generation is with one leg, like you said, in one world, and the other leg in another world. And the third generation, Spanish is maybe not the best example, but typically for Indians, for instance, third generation Indians in any country, they have little association with the home country, the mother country, if you want. And with what you do, I would guess your intentions would be very positive. There must be, but generally the second generation seems to have the most problems or generate the most problems because they're being criticized on one side because they don't fit in on that side, and they're being criticized on the other side because they don't fit in there. So it like you said, it's caused a lot of identity issues for these people. Like, what do I do? Where do I belong?
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. It is mostly second generation. I think we said before, I'm using Spanish or Latinos as an example, or Hispanics, because that's my primary focus, and I'm in the Spanish and Portuguese department, so it has to be related. And it's just sort of maybe my cultural frame is more, I have more experience and exposure to these groups than others. But yeah, I think it is people often talk about that 3-generation shift model for language and culture. And one thing different, maybe you talked about like between Indian immigrants and Spanish or people of Spanish speaking descent, is that in the U.S., there may be stronger pockets of communities based on our socio-political history.
Right.
That like Spanish was here before English. There are we have a lot of border with Spanish-speaking country, Mexico.
Yes.
So in those areas, you do see Hispanic communities maintaining Spanish dominance for beyond 3 generations of being here. Yeah. But I think but in a lot of cases where people immigrate from Spanish into the United States, emigrating to the United States, into an area that's not a border community, you do see these same typical, like first, second, by the 3rd generation, more or less, they're fully like Americanized in some way. I don't know if these are proper terminologies, but like, yeah.
Oh, of course. I mean, we understand what you mean with that, and I think the difference typically between the Latinos and say the rest of the world, even if you want. If you listen to the news, American news, CNN and Espanol, for instance, that is, I mean, every 3rd word would be Estados Unidos. It is the United States has such an influence on I guess, I mean, on reality, on perception of Latinos in general. And I think that's, I mean, the further south you get, that might get less, but nonetheless, I mean, every Venezuelan has an American bank account, for instance. Yeah. It's that kind of concept. I'm generalizing here. I want to step back, and because you mentioned you did your initial PhD in Hispanic linguistics, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How are Hispanic linguistics different from U.S. linguistics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Hispanic linguistics really just means to focus on the Spanish language in particular when studying linguistics. Clearly, we have a program that asks us to look at linguistics from a more global perspective. But then in the end, we're supposed to be focusing on issues related to the Spanish language and culture as it relates to language use or just linguistic properties. So could be very theoretical, but always using Spanish language to test theories. It could be very applied, which is more the realm that I get into. But yeah, so it just means really studying language through the perspective of Spanish language.
Okay. There's this thing I hear Americans saying, well, we have a very rich language. English is a very rich language. We have the most words. Look at Shakespeare, nobody would understand him. Why not? Because he used, 12,500 words or something like that. Is there any truth in that? Does Spanish have more words or less words, or?
That is, I've actually never thought about the number of words in a language to allow it to express things more or less richly.
Yeah, because it's so subtle.
Yep.
Okay, I know, of course, I mean, the whole setup in terms of Spanish is totally different in terms of the conjugation of verbs is very different, which in English we use multiple verbs to actually construct a certain time and place situation. But that I understand. I was just curious if you would have the definitive answer to that question: who has the most words?
I do not have the definitive answer to who has the most words, and I feel okay saying I do not know the answer to that.
That's perfectly fine as well, because nobody seems to know so far.
Right.
So that does not make a difference. You work at Lingo Live, and which is a company that is a language learning company, if I may say it as disrespectful as that.
Sure.
And you are. We had the CEO Tyler Muse a couple of weeks ago. You are the Chief Learning Officer. What is it? What do you do? What does a Chief Learning Officer do?
Yeah, and I think that title can be a little misleading because in most organizations, a Chief Learning Officer is someone who is in charge of the HR department, especially like learning and development areas. So it's maybe better if I were called like the Chief Learning
period.
Program Chief. Yeah.
No Indian.
Chief. So I had the learning and community team here at Lingo Live, and we develop the approach that our coaches use and help guide and educate them on what our beliefs are and best practices and try to empower our coaches with this information. We work with the engineering team to try to build it on the back end, so there's support there. We hire the coach community and try to create the community around the coaches so they feel supported, valued, and connected here. We liaise with all the other departments to make sure they understand sales, marketing, customer success, so they understand what we're doing here in this program, what learners and coaches are doing when they connect, what the progress and impact should look like from this program, how they should be measuring it and reporting it. So that's more or less, we provide webinars for coaches. There's a lot of different things we do, but all along the lines of how we go about creating the impact that we are trying to create at Lingo Live.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And because your approach is quite different. What is it? Duolingo, I think that's an app that a lot of people seem to know. That is like prompting words and stuff like that. But you do this actually coaching, so you could be my Spanish teacher. Being from like either Mexico, Guatemala, or a native Spanish-speaking country.
Yeah,
true?
Exactly. Yes, true.
Okay,
true.
So how do you? I think I asked this question to Tyler as well. How do you, in this particular example, if you have this teacher from Guatemala, how do you prep him for an American student?
How do you prep them for an American?
What do you particularly say that you would not say, to an American, because that is so obviously obvious?
Interesting. I think for now, we actually probably take it from a different perspective, but I'm going to take that into account when I start to think about how we prep our coaches. We really think more from the learner perspective, I think still. Like we think, okay, who is the learner that's coming in? We expect maybe our coaches to be a little bit more like of this kind of global-minded nature but I think you're making a really good point without necessarily making a point, is that maybe we should also tailor our education for our coaches to their cultures of reference as well. But we ask them more to think about the learner from that perspective, like where's the learner coming from, what company are they working with, what's their personality, their learning styles.
Okay, all right, yeah, that makes good sense. I don't want to put you on the spot like that. It is just, I am. It happens to be, and this is apparently how the universe seems to work. I'm a Spanish student myself, and I'm in my second fast year, which means this would be my third year or fourth year coming actually. And I've had a couple of teachers, and one is so different from the other. So the approach, and these are Belgian teachers. And they teach me as an individual. But their approach even seems to be different.
Totally.
So and I know I can remember from my high school years that if I from math, which I was struggling with, one teacher I just got B's all over and C's all over, and I did the same a year later, and I got A's and B's and A's, etc., B plus, just because the teacher is different. So that is really important. And so how at this moment, how do you select coaches for this case? It's partially, it is a bit of trial and error, but we have a matching algorithm that tries to match. Right. We get coaches to input maybe what their passions and strengths are. We lead with sort of the skills-based curriculum. So over the last few years of working with, let's say, engineers in the tech industry, we understand what some of the most popular skills or category of skills that they're looking to work on, like interpersonal skills or leadership skills or pronunciation, and so we have coaches sort of self assessing as these are my passions, these are my strengths in these areas, and then when learners come in and they're doing their diagnostic about what sort of things they're looking to work on, we start with that kind of this algorithm that matches based on passions and interests, and we start there. Coaches do a bit like a human needs analysis, working, just trying to get to unpack some of this stuff. Who is this learner? What are they looking to get out of this program? If they find in the first lesson or two that it's not a great match, then we, based on the information we've gathered through the diagnostic and through the interactions in our learner success team who comes in after the first lesson to meet with that learner, we get a better, more holistic picture of who this individual is.
And then if that first coach didn't seem to be really working out in the first lesson or two, then we say, okay, actually, based on all this information, we have a human algorithm that says, hey, I think you would work really great with Sherry Choi because she's amazing at working with females who are looking at empowerment issues and advocacy, self-advocacy skills, and that's what you seem to be looking for. And let's see if this works.
So there's initially there's a technical or paper match if you want, and then of course if it doesn't, then you use common sense, evidently. I mean, in the end, that's because it is because I mean, language is so much more than culture as well, and so much more than words. So you need that click with someone, I guess. Yeah. Typically, the method that you're using.
No, I totally agree. I think it's the foundation of what we're doing. It's also, I mean, it's sort of like, to go back to my dissertation, it's kind of the underlying foundation of what I'm trying to say is that relationship piece is as important as anything. I think that's a big comment, and it's probably difficult to fully prove that in a scientific way, but that relationship offers you the entry point into a new culture, a new community, a new way of thinking. You want to be invested and motivated to have these interactions and communicate about these things, and feel also safe in doing so. You might need to express, like I used the word, Americanized earlier. With my coach, they may direct me to a better word choice, but I need to feel safe in expressing myself fully, so you can guide me in the right direction, and also start to pick up on my patterns. So that relationship in itself, like the meaningfulness of that relationship, I think is really, really important. The safe, trusted environment that relationship creates is also incredibly important. But also the longevity of that relationship, just so that you as my coach can pick up on patterns and personality quirks and other things that are holding me back, ways of thinking, etc. Yeah.
For you say you approach a lot from the learner perspective. With that, does it make sense in terms of learning speed? I would say to occasionally switch coaches and teachers. Because is that good or not good?
I mean, I think it's great. I know we do have a lot of learners on our platform who really prefer to stick with their one coach. But I definitely advocate for multiple different interactions, right? I mean, it's a great way to test new hypotheses, or things between you and me can be great and it makes sense. And you've also, here, I want to say this. What happens between two people as they communicate more and more over time is they start to develop their own interlanguage, or sort of almost like pigeon eyes, right? So in the end, what I needed to express in 3 comments or 3 statements, I might now be able to express with a head nod. So it also allows me to become a little bit lazier in some ways with my speech as we become more aligned. So I think disrupting that alignment is great because it forces us to have to communicate fully or bring our ideas to a new person. And so in some ways, it's probably good to have that ongoing relationship with one person, but maybe sort of a polyamorous type approach to learning, like having a few other people that come in and they're not better or worse than the other coach, but just a different experience.
It's like, in a way, I mean, the analogy that comes to my mind is that if you're working out, if you're doing fitness exercise, doing the same exercise time and again, your body, hence your muscles, get used to it. So changing that is actually good for your physical development as well. So what you're saying is that what I'm doing is correct. I have my teacher 4 hours a week, my formal teacher. Then I have a friend of mine who lives here who I meet in person once a week for an hour or something. And then I have an online buddy in South America who I Skype with and then chat with. And that's a good mix in a way. I should be fluent in no time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you should be proficient, and you should feel comfortable going into pretty much any situation, I think, being able to handle it. Not yet. Are you? I mean, no. You feel it working though? I mean, what is your?
Of course. I'm able to express a lot more than I used to. I mean, than a year ago. But still, there's so many things that I just keep making mistakes. The fact they have two verbs for to be in terms of you are married again is the wrong example, but you are Jesse, but you are there, which in English is the same, and in my Dutch language is also one word for to be.
Yeah.
And here you have to know which one to use which. That's difficult in Spanish. I'd like. This is not about my Spanish teaching, by the way. Although I did write down subjunctive, which is upcoming next. And I think that is something
no, I think, but it is sort of about your Spanish. Like, I love, because these are different ways of, like, through sort of morphine, right? Like, views, like the way you speak a language really shapes the way you see the world.
Yeah.
And that, we don't have maybe as much use of subjunctive in English or, in Dutch, but in Spanish they do, and you can express different types of certainty or the way you feel or position yourself to an event or the truth of that event differently, right? And so that's, I think it's really important culturally as well to know that these differences exist, and it gives you maybe a small glimpse into why people say or do the things they do potentially.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, and hopefully that will develop as I progress in my language abilities. At this moment, I'm just more confused.
Yeah. But do you get chances to travel and use it?
Oh yeah. Spain is close, which, I mean, we have relatively cheap flights, so that's a relatively good escape. But I go to South America as well, so that's fine. I just wanna move to a different topic, because it's in the email. Your colleague Crystal wrote me the email, and she announced you. So I'm making air quotes here. She announced you as Jesse is a very passionate speaker on the intricacies of that word.
Intricacies?
Yes, of language, culture, and authentic belonging. So that's the part I didn't quite understand. So what in your concept, either from yourself or from your position in Lingo Life, is authentic belonging?
Authentic belonging, I think, is a concept that if I ever try to write it in my academic work, my advisor crosses it out and says, "What does this even mean?"
That's a good question. At least I didn't know.
Yes. Well, okay, so there's a sociologist, Brene Brown from the University of Houston, who talks about the concept of belonging versus fitting in. And so I'm stealing a little bit from her, but from what I understand, right, belonging is just this feeling that you come to a group, and at any point you are enough. You are exactly who you are. You are not trying to change yourself for the sake of how others will respond to you.
To fit in.
Yes, to fit in, right? And so when we come to this, like, sort of full acceptance of who we are at any given moment, that is sort of maybe an idealized state. But it does seem to be, as humans, we're often just trying to fit in, and we're trying to anticipate other people's reactions to our behaviors or our language or communication, and then change them accordingly. Because we are human beings, right, have these alignment strategies because we are adaptive creatures. Alignment between people is what has allowed us maybe to survive, and in some ways speaking. So I think it's natural that people are trying to align, to anticipate, to show you that I am not a threat. I am with you. We are together in this. And so, this idea of belonging is really important, or even authenticity. So when you're trying to teach language or communication or culture or even any type of skill, you want it to be something that eventually the person integrates either pieces of that skill into their authentic way of being. So meaning, like, you're not asking somebody to do something that is just so outside of themselves and it feels really forced. And so when you think about behavior change from this perspective, you really have to understand how long these things can take and how much different types of interaction are required, and mind setting and mind shifting. And if you're not okay with who you are, if you're just trying to fix yourself to fit in, these behaviors are always going to feel a little inauthentic, or it's just not going to stick.
It's like inauthentic. That makes, well, for me, that makes good sense. You're not real, and if you're not real, it's going to take an effort. And if you always have to put in an effort, it'll feel like this pair of shoes where the left shoe always hurts, because it's never good, never real. Yeah, right. It makes good sense. Okay. I have three more questions. That's just two. This is three more questions.
Yeah.
Three more questions, just out of curiosity, and if you don't want to answer, that's perfectly fine as well. If from your perspective, your experience, can you explain the love-hate relationship with what the Americans have, or some Americans have, with the Latinos? You know, you there is a population that wants to throw them out. There's even a population, or a tiny population, one man even, that wants to build a wall. And then again, there are many people that say, you know, it's no, we need them. I think the current trend at this moment is that the opposition against Latinos in the U.S. is becoming less. So, what is that? What does it come from?
Well, I think it stems from centuries of, probably like back to like sort of socio-political, historical context in the United States, before it was even the United States, when Spaniards who had originally come to Mexico and then started to explore what is now the southerly U.S.
Yeah.
They started to create this. There was this maybe like this, I don't know, Spanish like Tex-Mex, really like a group of people who were there. But then you had sort of the original Anglos who lived in the southeast part of the U.S. who had sort of come and moved into that area. The colonial people, whatever, and they had maybe already a background. This maybe is too deep, and I'm not like a historian in this way.
I understand.
I'm going to caveat some of this right now, but that they were already used to this idea of hierarchy within society, that it is okay they had slaves. It's okay to own people. It's okay that one person is better, one person serves another person. And some of this is some of the early relationships that existed in some of these early colonies that were set up in like the Texas area, maybe in California. And so there's already that tension very, very early on in the 1700s. And so I think, some of that is very, very old. Some of it is also just this notion of like, once you have gained kind of ubiquitous power in a place, anything that threatens that is something that causes you some discomfort. And people do like to see themselves fit into some sort of hierarchy. And although it'd be nice maybe if we got to a place where that wasn't so much the case, but so you do see trends, I think now, like you said, like some people maybe even is nearly 50-50, or I'm not even sure where the U.S. stands on this right now.
Yeah. No, well, that's not important either. I mean, that's not the point. Yeah. But your main thing would be that it's a historical origin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Is that correct?
Roots back many centuries and persists today. Mm-hmm.
It's awkward that these feelings sort of they linger on so long. This must be, I don't know, it's a bit outside of the scope of this podcast, but this is in a way this taught behavior.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely, passed down and just reinforced through different social or through media. That says there are people who are at different levels of status within this country,
sure.
Typically, it's interesting also, I think, that it's also sort of reinforced like within the cultures themselves, right? So sometimes you can hear like second generation immigrants are as critical to first generation immigrants as people with a critical voice who have been here for many generations, because people are sort of programmed to see difference and position yourself to place space between you and this other thing, right? And I think that's a little unfortunate from my perspective as well.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, sorry for. Usually, I end up on a lighter note, rather than digging into too deep and sensitive politics. Usually, I tend to avoid politics because it's outside of the realm of culture, at least the one that I want to talk about. So. Let's move towards those last two questions. The one but last question is: can you give us 3 tips to become more culturally competent from your experience, your work experience, your personal life? Anything goes.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces is to try to find ways to develop empathy, right? And that comes through this sort of developing relationships with as many people from different perspectives as possible and interacting in as many different ways as you possibly can and putting yourself in positions that allow you to develop maybe truer empathy. It's one thing to know about a hardship somebody has faced, but it's another thing to have experienced it to some degree through yourself, if not at least hearing and knowing somebody intimately who's gone through it and processing it that way. So I think that developing empathy through relationships and interaction is probably one of the best things that I can say, and it kind of involves many different things. But obviously there are the typical ones like traveling and whatever. But I think the third thing that I would say besides those two pieces is really working with somebody who can help you see things differently. I think one of the things that has been eye-opening for me going through a grad school program, right? I come from a rural area where maybe education isn't the top value of this whatever, but what I've learned through education is how to see things differently. That like, even I've seen maybe like a model or two that you've used for talking about culture, and maybe it helps you think like, oh, what I thought was the problem was X, but now that I understand it from a different perspective, right. I see the true issue is really X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
And it's that Dutch people see learning through more of a spiral cycle, and whereas Americans go more this like trial and error method that looks like a staircase. And so, oh, now I see. I thought the difference was because I am passive aggressive and you are, whatever. But really, I see it's maybe different. It's more embedded in our culture, and that's how we communicate. So having someone help you, maybe like a coach. I'm not trying to advocate for coaching, but like somebody who can enlighten you in some ways as to how things really work. And then just having experiences and developing empathy.
Okay, good stuff. All right, excellent. Last question. It's a really easy one, Jesse. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So Lingo Live is on Twitter and we're on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn personally, but I am not really on Twitter or Facebook a little bit. But yeah, are you talking me personally, or
that's up to you? If they want to get in touch with you as Jesse Abing, or maybe and through Lingo Live, why not?
Yeah, either way. Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers it. LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook for Lingo Live.
I'll put that there. All right, great. I think we've come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much. Two people from Lingo Live, two different perspectives. It's been a joy. Are you very fluent in Spanish?
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty fluent in Spanish. I mean, it's been 20 some years of living in the cultures and working with people and loving people, liking people, hating people. Just lots of emotions here.
I envy you for that. I'm going to get there. One day I'm going to get there. That's my objective. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Jesse Abing, number 94 from Lingo Live. The chief, hang on, I need to get that title right again. The Chief Learning Officer. Yes, appreciate it very much. Chris. And I'm pretty sure we'll talk to each other in the future.
Sounds good. I really appreciate your time. It's been great. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you. Adios.
Adios. Ciao.
Ciao.